Glenn Danzig, the shopping cart theory. Is it a litmus test? Let's find out on
Into the Fray.
Let's get ready to rumble. Hey y'all, Patrick James, John Double Tap Britton.
I know my name.
I know, I have to say it once in a while just to remind you. And we are going to talk about the shopping cart theory. Is it really a litmus test?
Yeah, we posted this on our Cold Dead Hands page. I posted it as a Midnight Munchies, and it kind of blew up. Even given our limited Facebook reach these days.
Yes, we have been limited, shadow banned, whatever you want to call it. We have certainly had our reach decimated.
But it was interesting because this little shopping cart theory, which emerged on 4chan back in May of this year, is the earliest record we could find of it expressed as a theory like this.
I wish I would have expressed it because we've been talking about this very thing much longer than May. This is something that we've discussed for a while, and it could be because I was a cart guy back when I was 15, 16 years old. So, yeah, I kind of get a lot of the theory.
But you mentioned Glenn Danzig?
Glenn Danzig! The Misfits! Yes. This is loosely attributed to Glenn Danzig, but of course, like everything on the internet, it's all about date and time. So Date and Time says that it was an anonymous 4chan user.
Mm-hmm.
Could have been Glenn Danzig
posting anonymously. Yeah,
never know. But he did mention it the very next day. So I don't know. You decide. But let John run through the theory. This is different than what is attributed to Glenn Danzig.
Slightly. We've added a few little embellishments.
We have embellished on it just a little bit, so all those who like to argue about it being a real litmus test, yeah, we've kind of addressed those issues. Get to it with no further ado.
So, the shopping cart theory. The theory goes, it's a litmus test for whether a person is capable of self-governance. Now, you may have heard that phrase in our founding, for example. So, how does the theory go? It says, to return the shopping cart is, for the most part, an easy, convenient task, and one in which we all should recognize as the correct and appropriate thing to do.
Right.
And you might even say it's objectively the right thing to do.
I think most people would objectively say it's the right thing.
Now, you took the cart, you return it, right?
Yeah, we add the objectively because you might object. And it's subjective because you might have a reason or an excuse. But proceed.
But it's objectively the right thing to do. There are no situations other than dire emergencies or, personal handicaps in which a person is not able to return the cart or at least secure it so that their cart doesn't do damage to other people's property.
Now, see, this is where we changed up what the original theory, because we were addressing what most of our commenters were saying.
Right.
Well, it's flawed. That's flawed. What about handicapped people? I can't return a cart. I'm handicapped. Listen, we get it. I understand. We know a lot of handicapped people. That's explanatory, so we added that.
And another one that came up a lot was mothers with children.
Mm-hmm.
I get all my kids loaded in the car and my groceries. I'm not going to leave my kids unattended to go return the cart.
Shoot, that's handicapped.
Well,
you're handicapped. Whether it's physically or you're handicapped by some other reason, it's a handicap.
But the gist of the theory is, if you're by yourself, you're grocery shopping, it's a nice day, it's not raining, there's no reason, no emergency, no extenuating circumstances why you couldn't return the cart.
Yep.
Now, it's not illegal to abandon the cart,
Right.
and therefore the shopping cart presents itself as an example of whether a person will do what's right without being forced or rewarded for doing so. Because, I mean, you don't really get any benefit from returning the cart. You're actually going out of your way to do it.
Right.
But you're also not being forced to do it. There's no law that says you have to. There's no cart police roaming the parking lot, waiting to write you a ticket if you don't return it.
Might be a bunch of Karens.
So, and no one will punish you or fine you for not returning the cart. You gain nothing by returning it other than the knowledge of doing the right thing.
Yep.
A person who's unable to do this basic task of their own free will is likely to be a person who must be threatened by laws or regulations enforced, and the force that stands behind that.
Yep.
The KISS theory.
This is a KISS theory.
Yeah.
It's simplistic.
The KISS theory can determine through basic philosophical arguments as to whether a person is a good or a bad influence on society.
Exactly.
Now, this particular theory, again, it's basically, will you do the right thing without being forced to and with no personal benefit for doing so?
Yep.
So it's literally just doing the right thing for the sake of doing the right thing. Can you self-govern to that point to where you are going to do what's right without any outside influence? And it's not only right in the individual sense, as in, you're doing the right thing, but it's also right in a broader societal sense. Because, like pointed out, if you leave the cart loose, gust of wind comes along, cart goes sailing through the parking lot.
Takes out 97-year-old granny.
Yeah. She didn't see it coming, or she couldn't get out of the way fast enough.
She didn't get run over by a reindeer this year. It was a shopping cart.
Or it comes smashing into your car, and now you've got a big gash down the side of your car because somebody else didn't think it was their job to return the cart to the
or
cart
secure
corral.
it.
Jump it up on the curb just so the wind doesn't blow it away.
Yep.
Anything to keep it from
damaging
somebody else's property or personal injury. Those that argue against this theory, they make a lot of excuses. Some of them we've already covered: the disabilities, the kids, things like that. And it was interesting because in the comments, now we're talking about Facebook, right?
Yep.
Somebody reads this post about the shopping cart theory, which basically says that if you don't return the shopping cart, you're basically not a good person.
Well, and the original said it's the ultimate litmus test.
Right.
It's not the ultimate.
But, I mean, it is a good
But it
rule
does
of thumb.
It shows character.
It's a good rule of thumb, judge a character. But people who, once they read the post, nobody on Facebook knows whether they return the cart or not, yet they felt compelled to come into the comments and not only say that they don't return the cart, but try to rationalize and justify
why they don't.
And it was really an interesting
Perspective.
It was
introspective.
Just the fact that people felt that need, because obviously the post made them feel bad about something.
They felt something, good, bad, or otherwise. They felt something or a need or desire to comment in defense of their desire to not do something good.
Which in its own strange way kind of validates the theory in and of itself.
Absolutely validates the theory.
And I think you added a little caveat to the end, didn't you?
I did. This little test isn't about what you do every single time. See, this is, again, the infinitesimal nature of people. They have to create all these little, tiny, minute reasons as to why they don't do something. What this is reflective of is, what do you do the majority of the time? We're all not going to return the cart every time we go to the store. And if you do, hoorah, that's awesome.
Hey, when it's raining, I don't always return it. Now, I may try to at least
Kick it up on the curb.
or get about halfway there and try to give it a quick shove in that general direction.
Yep.
But
there's lots of times that we don't do these things. Okay? It's not trying to tell you that you're a bad person because you don't do it. No. What it's trying to iterate or explain in a very simple, basic test is, do you do it the majority of the time?
right.
Now, only you know if you're above 50% or not. This isn't about, oh, I'm going to toot my own horn and I return it every time. It had nothing to do with that. It has everything to do with what were your intentions and what is the percentages that you would do that given the opportunity.
Now, obviously, most people, if they happen to be parked right next to the cart corral, whether they normally return the cart or not, I mean, they'll probably shove it in there. Now, if you've got to walk more than 3 or 4 parking spaces, then it starts getting into a little more of a moral judge of character.
It does. And again, so many comments about why they shouldn't, why they don't. Like, well, I'm robbing somebody of their job.
That was the most common by far. Was it revolved around the store's responsibility. They hire people to do that, or if they don't, they should hire people to do that.
Yep.
Or if I return the cart, I'm robbing somebody of their job. Now, this thread of rationalization just blew my mind. But it's also very indicative of society today.
It is.
Because people expect somebody else to do so much these days and aren't willing to do so much themselves.
Oh, I got my NRA membership. I'm a lifetime member.
So I'll send my money to the NRA, but I won't go testify at a Senate hearing.
Yeah, I won't go sit in on my city council meeting or my school board meetings. No, but I'll pay somebody to do it for me.
Or, you've got government welfare, all manner of government dependency. I mean, even to the point, law enforcement in large degree has become a government dependency because a lot of people don't want to carry guns, so they depend on the police to protect them.
It's too dangerous. I got to be responsible all the time. If I'm going to carry it, I got to be responsible for it.
And that's what
You're
it
right.
all boils down to, responsibility.
And it's absolution of responsibility.
Yep.
I mean, it literally is that simple, and that's why that litmus test is actually pretty accurate.
And this was another one that somebody pointed out was, in the vein of it's the store's responsibility. And I replied to him, I said, the store doesn't have a responsibility to provide carts at all. They do that out of a convenience for you, the shopper, as well as having a cart enables you to buy more of their stuff while you're in there.
Well, and we could do the social approach to it as they did in Europe, and how Aldi brought that to America by requiring a quarter deposit. So there is an incentive to return your cart. You get your quarter back.
But see, and that undermines this whole theory.
Well, that lends towards
in that there's an outside influence. There's a financial gain or loss attached to that cart return.
Yep.
But when there is no outside influence, when it's merely your decision to return the cart or not, to just leave it to go wherever it goes whenever you drive out of the parking lot, regardless of who it may hurt, whose property it may damage. Now, I realize most people don't put that much thought into it. They push it into the empty parking spot and they take off expecting some cart guy to come out and gather it up.
Yeah.
but that takes time.
Well, and I get, oh, well, hey, if I don't return this cart, then somebody has a job. I get that theory. But the reality is, this isn't about you helping somebody keep a job. This is about you and your personal responsibility.
And not wanting to go out of your way to return a cart. And that's another thing. They put the cart corrals out in the parking lot for your convenience too.
Yep.
So when you talk about the store's responsibility to hire somebody to do it or this, that, and the other, you took the cart, you did your grocery shopping, you pushed the cart out to your car. Whose responsibility is it to return it? You took it, you return it. You open it, you close it. You turn the light on, you turn the light off. You see, there's a whole little system here that you're bucking when you don't return the cart.
Now, we've gotten through, we've given you the exceptions, we've given you parts of the rules for the litmus test so you could maybe understand it differently. Maybe you wouldn't argue your position about why you don't, and maybe you would understand that if you don't, then maybe you're part of the problem that we are experiencing as a society, as a whole, in a country that was designed with the concepts
of self-governance,
personal responsibility, responsibility as a whole. And our founders told us these things. They left their written works for us to read. Now,
it's interesting. It's interesting because, prior to our founding, the very concept of personal responsibility wasn't even really a thing in the English language.
Well, and we can take it back there to the first written examples. All right, personal or personality. About 1480 is when it was first actually recognized, the word personal or personality. 1640 for the word responsibility. Now, those two hadn't even been put together yet. Personal responsibility. Responsibility. First time that we actually saw an example in written print. Now, a lot of it could be said that, hey, we didn't have printing presses.
Yeah.
We did by then, but people still read, people still wrote. So, when do we see responsibility creeping up in America as recorded?
In reference to the president.
The executive. When they were sitting down and having all of their debates in 1787, the word responsibility was first uttered and then again documented by South Carolina Rep. John Rutledge. And again, in reference to the president, a single man would feel the greatest responsibility and administer the public affairs best. That was on June 1st. Personal responsibility. It was now used together for the first time and recorded. Hey, this could have been spoken many times over prior, but it was the first instance that we saw it was recorded in American history by Nathaniel Gorham on 18 July 1787. So they're still within the debates.
And still discussing the executive, the president.
Yep. Public bodies feel no personal responsibility and give full play to intrigue and cabal. So basically, he's explaining why putting that onus on one person would least likely allow them to deviate from their own personal responsibilities as a moral person.
And Hamilton himself used it in Federalist 69.
Yep.
When referring again to the executive, the president. The American executive would not be so sacred and inviolable, but impeachable and removable ruling in a delicate and important circumstance of personal responsibility. And basically what he's saying there is the president could be held accountable.
Yeah.
He wouldn't be sacred and inviolable like a blood king, you know. So not only was he in the highest position, but he was vulnerable in that position to being removed if he didn't perform.
And he needed to answer for his actions. If
Exactly.
he didn't do it the way it was supposed to be done, there was no passing the buck.
Delicate.
The buck stopped there.
Exactly.
Now, fast forward 200 plus years, and where are we at?
And it's interesting because, you know, this whole discussion of personal responsibility and being put together in that form around our founding, which itself is based on exactly what this shopping cart theory is supposedly exposing.
Yeah.
The ability of self-governance, which is literally another way of saying personal responsibility.
Personal responsibility. Yep. Now, to wit, I looked at Jefferson's book list, as I have several times, and you know, if you go online and look, you might see some here, and then you might see another list there. If you're one of those people who like to know what the founders read,
What's on their playlist?
yeah, Jefferson is certainly one of those founders. You can find out what he read frequently, and one of those was Homer,
Yeah.
the Odyssey.
And just to be clear, you know, the concept of personal responsibility was not new.
No.
When we're talking about the use of the word personal responsibility, that came into being around our founding.
Right.
But the concept obviously predates that, as Homer alliterates.
And Homer, in writing, he has Zeus talking to the mortals, and he's asking the mortals, why are you continually blaming the gods for your own iniquities, your own sin, your own problems? You caused it, and you want to blame somebody else for it.
Kind of like people blaming politicians and
While they're paying somebody else to do their work, while they're paying special interests.
you know, in the blame game, that kind of goes back to what was it? Nathaniel Gorham was talking about when he was talking about how public bodies, you know, groups, the collective, feel no personal responsibility because there's always somebody else to point the finger at.
Exactly.
You know, the Republicans point the finger at the Democrats, the vice versa.
Yeah.
The House points the finger at the Senate, yada, yada, yada.
Well, and nobody's holding them accountable.
And that's where...
Nobody's holding the politicians accountable, including the people.
And it's harder to do when you're dealing with a group than it is when you're dealing with an individual.
Well, and harder to do when you've allowed the federal government to grow so huge and expansive and overreaching. What are we supposed to do with all of those politicians sitting around deciding what laws we need to follow to be good servants
Well,
and cause less headaches?
and that's exactly the point. Politicians aren't supposed to be politicians. They're supposed to be public servants. You know, they throw that word out there when they want to, you know, improve their image,
Yeah.
but they don't actually live that public servant role.
No. No.
But, you know, and people inherently, I guess, want to have somebody else do for them more so nowadays than back in the day. Because back in the day, it was a lot easier to be self-governing because you literally had to work for your survival pretty much on a daily basis. I mean, if you didn't tote the water up from the river, you didn't have water, you know?
Paul talked about it in 2 Thessalonians. The one who is unwilling to work shall not eat. That's the truth. Those are the absolutes. If somebody says, well, that's not necessarily true, what about handicapped people? What about people who can't actually work for themselves? They were not talking about handicap. They were not talking about elderly parents. They were not talking about those people.
If you're capable,
If you are capable and you don't work, then you shouldn't eat. Is that harsh? Yeah. Does that work in our society? Not really. Because we've got all kinds of parents out there who don't manage to feed their children. And sometimes the best meals those children get are in public schools, which you might as well cancel that one out over 2020 because they didn't get into the public school system very often to get their good meal.
You know, I've said this for years now. American society is a victim of our own prosperity.
Absolutely.
You know, like I said, it was much easier in the old days to self-govern because you literally had to do daily in order to survive. Nowadays, we've got modern luxuries. You know, we've got Uber Eats and DoorDash. We've got people who are willing to do for us. You got a kid that'll come mow your lawn for you. All you got to do is pay him.
Yeah.
You know, the NRA will go lobby for you. All you got to do is pay him. And that prosperity, that disposable income, and that no longer needing to actually do to survive has created a nation of dependents.
Needy people.
People who are dependent on other people to do certain things for them because they never bothered how to learn how to do them themselves. You know, as a former plumber, you know, I did a lot of very simple tasks, you know, like taking the P-trap off under the sink and dumping the coffee grounds out of it and putting it back in, and charged them $150 for what took me like 30 seconds to fix. Now, and I realize we've got a lot more going on nowadays than they did back then.
Absolutely.
Back then, their life was, in a lot of cases, survival day to day.
Absolutely.
We've got a lot more modern conveniences. We do have a lot of things that, you know, are distractions. So people don't put the onus as much on themselves, again, back to the personal responsibility, as they did back then, because they don't have to. There's always somebody else they can pass the buck to.
And it goes back to parents, adults, not taking care of their children. Hey, I have a heart. I care about that. I give to charity. I do charitable work. That's my choice. I am a servant by nature. I was a public servant for many years. I am a servant. Servant's heart at nature. It is not my government's responsibility to ensure that somebody remains an adult to take care of their children. It's just not. That might be harsh. I get it. You got little kids here. You can't let them go hungry. But what do? Do you continue to enable the parents who aren't being responsible? Or do we find some way to punish the parents and not the children? Because all the welfare system's doing is creating more dependence. And it's teaching.
And it's funny because this started out as a simple conversation about returning a shopping cart.
Yep.
But the more you get into it, the more you see that the shopping cart is just a symbol.
Yep. Of personal responsibility.
Of personal responsibility, self-governance, and the thought process, especially in the comments.
Yep.
You know, the people who think it's the store's responsibility. No, it's not.
Nope.
You know, and people who think that, you know, I can excuse my actions, I can rationalize my actions, but it all really boils down to is you didn't want to walk the few extra feet to return the damn cart.
Well, I mean, come on, we all rationalize. We're walking down the aisle, you've got two things in your hands. You look down, I don't need both of these, and you just reach over and set it on the shelf and walk by, and you're saying, you know what? I'm making sure somebody has a job.
Yeah.
I know you've done it. I do it. But I struggle with doing it every time I do it, even though I might be in a hurry and there might be some justifiable reason as to why I just set that down where it didn't go and not where I picked it up from.
But you don't make a habit of it.
But I do not make a habit of it, and my conscience is always like, was it really the right thing to do? No, I should have walked the extra steps back to where it was at and put it on the shelf where it was placed intentionally so somebody else could buy it.
And that comes right back around to the very beginning. Without being forced or without having some benefit, will you do the right thing?
The majority of the time. Again, the majority of the time, because we all fall short and we don't do it 100% of the time. I don't care what anybody on Facebook says. I do it every time. Now, there's a time or two you haven't returned a cart. I assure you, there's a time or two that you haven't always done the right things, because nobody in this world is perfect except our Christ. That's it. So that's the only perfection we have to go by. And when you completely rationalize that there is no Christ, then what moral standard do you even have to follow anymore? I mean, seriously, the Bible is full of examples of morality, and whether they're just words on a piece of paper or words uttered by a man, they're good, solid words to follow.
Now, you know, we were looking for quotes
Yep.
along these lines, and this lack of personal responsibility, the shifting the blame and responsibility, goes back to something that Freud said. Sigmund Freud.
Who I don't adhere to most of his things, but this, I will say, Siggy was on par.
Yeah, I mean, everybody talks about freedom. I want my freedom, my liberties, my rights, this, that, and the other. But what Freud said was most people don't really want freedom,
Nope.
because freedom involves responsibility, and most people are frightened of responsibility.
Yep.
Now, that's a very harsh reality for a lot of people, because a lot of people view themselves as, you know, responsible adults, but yet at the same time will go out of their way to make an excuse for not returning a shopping cart.
Simplistic returning a shopping cart. It just doesn't make any sense. That's just not a good example. It's not a good litmus test. Is it or is it not?
Is it all inclusive? No.
No,
Are
of course not.
there exceptions and mitigating circumstances? Obviously.
Always, as with all things.
But as a rule of thumb, it's a pretty good character indicator.
Yeah.
And in what there was a quote about something in the small things and the big things.
Oh. The small things and the big things?
Yeah. It was one of the Bible quotes I think you'd printed up.
Oh, well, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
One who is faithful.
Luke. Go ahead.
One who is faithful in a very little is also faithful in much. One who is dishonest in a very little is also dishonest in much.
That's Luke 16:10.
Yeah, and it's basically saying that, you know, the little things matter. You know, if you're responsible with returning a shopping cart, you're probably responsible in other areas.
Now, here we go.
And-
I'll read this quote. This quote from one of the founders, who was always tagged a deist or always tagged an atheist because he spoke out against the church. What we obtain too cheap, we esteem too lightly. It is dearness only that gives everything its value. Heaven knows how to put a proper price on its goods. And it would be strange indeed if so celestial an article as freedom should not be highly rated. Thomas Paine, John's favorite founder. I don't know how he manages to pick a favorite, but hey.
Yes, I'm a Painiac, and yes, I did model my book, Gun Sense, after his book, Common Sense. So, I mean,
I get it.
I identify a lot with Thomas Paine.
I get it. You know, he had some great books, and his philosophy shaped the minds of most of our framers.
Yep. Whether
And
they
he
liked it or not.
And he was given very little credit for it. Just saying. So as we wind down this video, we got a couple of minutes, so we're going to use those couple of minutes to continue. This is about the shopping cart theory. And is it a proper litmus test?
It's a litmus test. It's a good rule of thumb.
It's a keep it simple,
Yep.
stupid litmus test.
And, I mean, again, if you're doing the little things, like returning the cart, then you're probably doing the bigger things responsibly.
Yep.
generally speaking.
Yep.
And if you're doing the irresponsible thing, like not returning the cart and putting other people's property in jeopardy, then you're probably doing that in the bigger things too.
That's the biggest one for me is somebody innocent in all of your cart using pulls in and his car gets dinged up because you didn't secure the cart where it needed to be secured. Who's at fault there? Is that just happenstance? Does the innocent guy, innocent girl, innocent granny who got run over by a shopping cart, is it their fault?
No,
Is it the store's fault
no,
because they didn't make sure?
That's not to say that somebody who doesn't take their cart back would intentionally hurt people.
No, that's not implying that.
But they also, obviously, wouldn't go out of their way to prevent damage or injury to other people. Whether they thought that far into the process of the shopping cart theory or not. You know, everybody knows, anybody who's been driving for any period of time knows that cars get dinged in parking lots by shopping carts.
No.
So
Personal responsibility goes that you wouldn't be on your phone texting or driving either. But people do it all the time and take other people's lives. Somebody else's life, an innocent person who's driving down the road while you're shifting left of center every 2 seconds until you finally drift so far left of center that you hit an oncoming car. Whose fault was that? The guy who was in his lane or the person who was on their phone?
So, is the person on their phone self-governing?
Not very well.
Is the person who leaves the cart willy-nilly in the middle of the parking lot self-governing?
Not really. What about the person who gets in the car after they've been drinking and they take out an entire family?
Oh, but see, that's not their fault because they're impaired. They're not thinking properly.
Well, you had the choice to put your keys up prior to impairment.
And every drink you took, you chose to take.
Yeah. Nobody forced you. So, I mean, that's where this is headed, is that we all make choices every day. Where do your choices fall on the spectrum of responsibility?
And how do they affect society at large? I mean, if something as simple as returning a shopping cart or not can potentially lead to damage or injury of somebody else, lead to people being overworked, chasing down carts, trying to get them back up because there's no carts at the entrance for anybody else to use when they go shopping. You know, it's nothing happens in a vacuum. Everything we do
Affects somebody,
either directly or indirectly. And
what is it, the 5 degrees of separation from Kevin Bacon? 6 degrees?
6 degrees.
6 degrees of separation from Kevin Bacon? I mean, come on, really? You guys went through that whole thing with Kevin Bacon and 6 degrees of separation. Don't you really realize how things all affect? What about that movie? What is it, Crash?
I don't know.
I think it was Crash. I don't know for certain. But, I mean, there's movies about how each individual life here, 4 instances happening all at the same time, collide. That's what we're talking about. Is all of these instances collide. Nobody's pointing their finger at somebody and saying, you don't deserve liberty and freedom. What we're trying to say is, only you know if you do or not.
And
In your
only
heart.
you can change whether you do or not.
Exactly. This is all on us. The onus is on us.
Whether you've thought through the shopping cart theory or not, now that you're exposed to it, think it through
Yeah.
and apply it to other areas of your life.
You know, these are the things that we have to do. That's being responsible.
Yep. That's self-governing.
That's free thinking. Being critical. Thanks for following along. We appreciate it. If you want peace,
Prepare for
prepare
war.
for war.